I know it's really hard to try to pinpoint an origin point for anyone who makes work as personal, as idiosyncratic as you do, but I'm going to try, so please indulge me. Do you remember any one moment or series of moments where your approach to storytelling or it became clear that you wanted to make films? Was it a book, a particular scene, a particular movie?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. Some of them are more vomit-inducing than others. But obviously, I was into movies, and as most humans are these days, and when I saw From Star Wars to Jedi, that's like a making of Star Wars movies that particularly revolved around Return of the Jedi, that really excited me to see like this is something that is an occupation, and this is made by people in a very like tangible way that you could see. You could see people like building Jabba the Hutt and operating Jabba the Hutt, and that was the first thing that really got me thinking like maybe I would like to make movies. How cool is that? And I did, growing up, I did a lot of theater, and I was also into visual arts, and I did a lot of drawing, and I was into comic books. And then I met this Latvian American artist who lived in Nashua, New Hampshire. I was from southern New Hampshire, and he had a show of his paintings uh, and drawings at the University of New Hampshire. His name is Hyman Bloom, and they were like really intense. The drawings particularly were quite grotesque and horrifying, like demons on astral planes and all that. And I didn't understand this at the time, but he was like into the occult and into seances, uh, and he just seemed like an interesting wizardly person. And I met him like through like my parents met him at a dinner party, and I was enamored of his work and talked to him, and he gave me a book of Dürer engravings, and he kind of said, if you can draw these, you can draw anything. And I didn't run home and burn my comic books, but I almost had that. I had that urge, that's a more vomit-inducing story, but it did change my perspective a lot, and I think I've become I had burgeoning dilettante taste as a child, and then it really sort of came full force after that. And then the last most major thing, which connects to Nosferatu, was so I saw Nosferatu when I was quite young, burgeoning dilettante 9, and Max Schreck's performance and the atmosphere of the film, and the fact that Murnau and his team turned it into this simple fairy tale, it was incredibly engaging to me. And at 17, I had the opportunity to do a senior directed play, and I, with my friend Ashley Kelly Tata, who's now an opera and theater director in her own right, we did Nosferatu on stage. It was like black and white, a silent film on stage. We did have black and white makeup, black and white wigs, costume sets, and then this another wizardly gentleman named Edward Langlois, who had like the one cool theater in southern New Hampshire, who did the Duchess of Malfi and True West instead of My Fair Lady. He saw this humble show we had and invited us to do a more professional version of it at his theater, and that kind of solidified what I wanted to do with my life. Not that it was like some opportunity to like get out in the world, but just for myself,
Mm-hmm. And there's this, I love you bringing it back to Nosferatu, because remembering the first time I watched that film, and there's a bit of a legend around it, that it feels like it was just discovered, like it's an archive documentary about a real vampire that happened.
Yeah, and I think like now we have the luxury of seeing the restored versions, which you can see more now as intentions, but you can also see the bald cap on Max Schreck and the grease paint on his eyebrows. And in the version that I saw as a kid, like he was just a vampire, and like in some, because of the deteriorated image, sometimes his eyes looked like he had cat-shaped pupils, and that is what gave rise to the legend that Max Schreck was really a vampire in the Willem Dafoe Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. Yeah.
But it ties back to your films the way, at least that I perceive them is that there's always this blurred line between what's imagined, what's supernatural, and what's real, both for us as an audience and sometimes for your characters as well. Do you have that separation in mind when you're writing?
There's no separation because if you believe it, it's real. And in the mindset of the characters in the films, these things are real. Nosferatu, it's a little more complicated because there are people who don't believe in vampires like initially. But yeah, I mean, there was no Viking atheists. That like it's just like a thing, so I mean, to say that there's no modern lens is like impossible. And also, in The Witch, there is sort of a nod to the fact that maybe this is ergot poisoning, and everything in the Northman that you see that is like otherworldly, supernatural, mythic, could be a dream, could be also like hallucinatory substances, whatever. So but that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it as real.
Yeah, and I wonder as well how, from those initial kind of touch points that you were described when you were a 9-year-old aspiring dilettante, in your own words, and I was an aspiring 6-year-old dilettante. I tried to make everyone watch The Wizard of Oz, and they booed me out of the class. It's my foundational trauma.
Yeah.
How has your approach, especially since you've made this work that is so heavily interested in exploring myth and folklore and superstition and belief systems, how has your own approach to those interests shifted?
I mean, I don't think it has. I hope that there's like a further understanding or something, but I don't think it's really shifted. I mean, there is in the Murnau film, the Van Helsing character is a guy named Bulwer who doesn't really do much. And I like the Van Helsing character, but I find that in the book, he's a little too sweet for my taste. He's a little too wholesome. I like my vampire hunters to be a little bit more insane. And so I made this guy Von Franz, who's played by Willem Dafoe. And he rails against enlightenment in one speech, but I think he's kind of got the right idea, because he's got, in the one hand, he's following modern science, which is not very modern in 1838, but okay, and on the other hand, he's remembering that there is good things that like Paracelsus and people in the past had to say. So while I would not want to live in the past, like, I think that I'm clearly in my films, like, have a kind of nostalgia for a time when there was less profane and more sacred. Yeah.
Feels like maybe a good moment to play the first clip that we're going to play tonight from The Witch. I really love this clip because it's so intimately sets us in Thomason's perspective, as well as introducing us to this world as they're expelled from it. Can you tell me, how do you approach characters when you're writing? Do you start with an image? Do you start with a costume or a line?
It depends on the piece, and I also very often I'm starting with a kind of atmosphere or a tone or an idea. I mean, this I talked about being like a Puritan's nightmare. And, I was very aware when I grew up in New England that there were people who grew up in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, like, hanging out in my backyard, like, a long time ago. And that was, interesting to me. And so, and also growing up near Salem and hearing about the Salem witch trials a lot, I thought about them a lot, but also thought, what if the witches were real? What would that be like? And this carried over into the creation of this thing. And then with this movie, you start with a family. I think, and it needed to be a fairly large family, because that would have been the case. And originally, each act kind of focused on a different family member, and then it ultimately in the final act became 5 acts. not 3 but 5 acts. The final act sort of became Thomason's story, and then Lars Knudsen and Jay Van Hoy, who produced the movie, kind of said that might be the best way to tell a story, but we can probably get the film financed if you have a central protagonist. And so then it clearly needed to be Thomason. But I think you can see ways in which that like original way of writing it is kind of like still sort of there, never totally escaped. But I think, with that film and with The Lighthouse particularly, because the worlds were small enough, I had like, talking about costume or whatever, like a dollhouse. It's like, this is their house. I studied the wills and from the period. I know what would be every single item in their household. I know how they're dressed. And so I can play with my dolls more efficiently when you have in like a very condensed location. It's, that changes when you're writing the Northman or Nosferatu or whatever. But then, each character, unconsciously is an extension of yourself. But consciously, you do want to try to become them, like an actor when you're writing it, and like and with all my films, I always do a pass where I only focus on this character or that character, and that's something that I've employed on some scripts, but not others. Is writing like scenes in between to that I know are not going to be in the film to kind of like more fully understand character relationships. So yeah, I don't know if that completely answers your question.
Do you ever share those in between scenes with your actors, with your co-writers when you've written with someone else?
For Nosferatu, I shared some stuff with Bill, so that he would know the backstory of Orlok, and I also wrote biographies of some of the smaller characters, just so that they would understand that they had a richer world than what you might just see on screen, and that like context would be imbued in their performance, even if it was more brief.
And just to stay on you as a writer for a second, you wrote The Witch by yourself, and The Lighthouse with your brother, and The Northman with Jorn, and Nosferatu again by yourself. How do you know when you need someone else's input, and how does that change or does that influence the way you write?
Sometimes it's just a matter of like time, man. Like it's just like you only have so sometimes I was working on Nosferatu, and I had a feeling it was not going to happen. And my brother had the idea for The Lighthouse. It was slightly different than what we actually made, but I called him up and said, would you want to make The Lighthouse with me? But I also, because I was working on other things, I needed him to kind of like break the script. So very often when I work with another writer, they will write the first draft, and then I will start. Like we work on creating the story together, and then they write the first draft, and then I come in to start like honing it. It was the same. It was more or less the same process with Shion, and but I continue to work with Shion. We've written a bunch of things that haven't gotten made. There was one script where like I wrote certain fantastical scenes in the last act and he wrote the rest. But then as we did more and more drafts, we would just pass it back and forth. I just did something more recently where I was like really compelled to break the script myself, even though I needed like someone else to bounce ideas off of and someone else to help me with the story structure. So you kind of every story demands different things, but certainly because of the realities of making commercial cinema being incredibly challenging, like it's good to have help when you're doing because you have to have multiple pots on the stove because you don't know what the studio's gonna want to order.
And you write even as you're shooting something else, or even as
No,
you're
never
post?
when I'm shooting.
Okay.
But in post production, generally, I hate what I've made, and so I'm like desperately engaged in like saving myself creatively by writing something that's not as horrible as what I've just shot. I didn't do that with Nosferatu, which was kind of interesting. I was really, not that I'm like A+, we nailed it, but I was very engaged with that all through post production, and would go home and watch like one or two horror movies, like and be thinking, what could I do? How can I, so that was interesting.
Has that? I've read you say something similar before that you never felt like you've quite really taken what was in your mind and put it on the screen. Has that now shifted? Has it started to lessen?
I think it's gone sort of. My first short film, Hansel and Gretel, is a nightmare. Someone, I don't know who, had a copy and put it on YouTube, but like, if you're an aspiring filmmaker and you think that I am good, watch that and you will like be inspired that you too could be good, because it's fucking like it's horrible. But but I learned from it, and so then my next short film was a little closer to my imagining, but also not, because it was my first time working with like a crew and a lot of people who are experienced with filmmaking. But then by the time I did my third thing, it was very much like, I imagine this, I know the locations, I'm be able to execute like what's in my head. Then, big stepping stone. Now I'm making a feature film. All of a sudden, and I'm proud of The Witch, and particularly the performances, but it's not what was in my head. So for me, even though like I'm proud of it, that frustrates me a lot. Lighthouse, a perfect little stepping stone after that. So that is much closer to my intentions. Then Northman, gigantic movie, battles, all this stuff, less close to my imagination. Nosferatu, more close. Okay. Life. So and it's not that being more close to what I envisioned makes it better or something. It's just makes it more satisfying for me personally.
Yeah.
So.
No, that makes complete sense. Let's play a clip from The Lighthouse, and then I want to talk to you about your characters.
Okay. Just to like, articulate what I was just talking about. When I watched The Witch, I was like, the pacing's so glacial, the sound design's anemic, there's no texture, why are the costumes so clean? I know it's church and it's Sunday, but goodness gracious, like that ADR performance, why did I choose that one? And and this, I was like, yeah, that's adequately miserable, Like I wish Pattinson's knees were a little baggier in the trousers, but it was pretty cool.
It's a perfect segue to my question about obsession. Because a lot of your characters, in fact, I'd say most of your characters in your films are obsessed in some way with something, and that obsession either drags them down to their demise or leads them to find something about themselves. What do you think is appealing to you about that kind of character, and maybe also to your actors? I feel like you're pretty.
If Willem Dafoe were here, he would say, "Busted." Yeah. Does that answer your question? I don't. Yeah. I guess I like that.
How do your actors feel about it? Kind of, is that something that is appealing to them about working with you with these kind of roles?
I think, the Witch was really wonderful because, I was working with actors who were not really famous. Like Kate Dickey and Ralph have done some great work, but they're character actors, and are not like, and are more recognized now than they were then. And of course, Anya's become Anya, but it was a different thing. I'm not supposed to lean in because the mic can pick me up if I sit back. And so that was cool, but the performances are, I think, undeniably strong. And then, Willem and Rob wanted to work with me, and Rob particularly, I mean, he still does, but particularly at that point in his career was looking for like super weird stuff. And Willem always, which is why that's why Willem is almost 70 years old and still fantastic, because he still works with first-time directors like now. Like he hasn't just leaned back and become a caricature of himself. He's like activated. So that was really fortunate for me to have that pairing, but also then they give those performances. So after that, then I've sort of developed a reputation for, and some people want to be a part of that, and some people don't want to be a part of that, and with Nosferatu, like everyone who signed up for that was like ready to like roll up their sleeves and be crazy and be obsessive and be possessed and just, go for it. And I also know now, like when I'm interviewing someone, like if it's going to be a good match and if they're ready to like, jump off the cliff.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you about this, because obviously you've worked with some incredible actors, have cast really, really well, and it must be sort of strange, but also an incredible privilege to have actors come to you and say, "I've seen your film, I want to do anything you make." How do you cast, and what do you expect from your actors when you decide to work with someone?
Yeah, I just really want them to want to do it. I mean, honestly, I know that sounds silly, but if you have someone who's like nervous and anxious about the situation, it's very hard to get the performance, because you need someone who is going to be raw and is going to like let their inhibitions go, and without being raw and selfless, you can't like be truthful on camera or on stage. You can get away with it a little bit on stage with technique sometimes, but on camera you can't. And but obviously you're looking for people who make sense with the character. I'm like drawn to like very extreme faces when I can get them. That was another thing. The background characters, which anyway, I like the movie, but so yeah, it's a lot of things. But I think it's the willingness and the hunger is because then we can work together. Like if you're, like if you have like some talent, the camera likes you, and you're willing, we can go there together.
How do you help them along the way? We can talk about specifically maybe about the Lighthouse or maybe bringing Nosferatu, but how do you help them when they're fully committed? They're jumping off the cliff with you. How do you nudge them in the right direction?
It depends on the actor, and it depends on the situation. But I think, like Willem is incredible, but we spent a lot on his big, like he has a big theatrical Miltonian speech, like in early modern English, and we worked on that like we were doing Shakespeare. Like I went to his little fisherman cottage where he was living at the time, and we broke it down and like, okay, well maybe this needs to come up and then this needs to come down, and go dive into this word more, and like Willem Dafoe doesn't need that for it to be good, but it is going to, hopefully like get across the specificity that I'm looking for. So Pattinson and Willem are very different. Talked about this a lot. Willem comes from theater. He likes to rehearse. He also likes to like go for it and commit 100% all the time. Pattinson wants to save it for the camera. And I need rehearsals because my camera work that I do with Jaron Blaschke is so specific that the actors need to rehearse the blocking before we get on to set, or it's going to feel canned and it's going to feel not alive. But Rob got kind of like freaked out by Willem going 110% all the time. So that was an interesting challenge. And Rob was doing more. He's not method, but he was doing more like methody things to get into the zone. He would spin around and make himself dizzy before a take, and he would like jam his fingers down his throat to like almost gag himself, to like have his eyes be crazy and be, and Willem's kind of like, but then, I was working with Nicholas Hoult on the first week of Nosferatu, and he needed to be terrified and he needed to be out of his mind, and he is a very, very good technical actor and also like a very like emotional actor, but he was also like did not want to fuck up. He did not want to fuck up, and he was like too in his head. So I was like, why don't you spin around the room and gag yourself?
A perfectly reasonable direction, really. But you mentioned your cinematographer, Jaron Blaschke, and also you've worked with your editor, Louise Ford, on all the films you've made.
Yeah, except for Hansel and Gretel. But,
yeah. But Can you talk a little bit about those collaborations? How do you push each other?
Yeah, I mean, easily. Jaren does not mince words, and I thought he hated me after our first collaboration. In fact, but one of the things I value most about both of those relationships is that like there is no bullshit. Like it can be harsh, but like, oh, Jaren, isn't this like I do the shot like this? And he's like, yeah, that would be really great if it was a 1950s TV show. But we're always, Jaren and I are always trying to push each other, and I think one of the great I'm complaining about things with the films not meeting my expectation, but one of the great things about that is that motivates you to do it better the next time. And everyone on the crew has their things that they wish were a little bit better because I keep working with the same HODs, and we know, and we're like, okay, like we can, let's do that a little better the next time, and that is driving for all of us, and I think I can only say how I experience it personally. I don't know how audiences will experience it, but I feel that like in Nosferatu, we did a better job in sort of making the oneers, the long unbroken takes feel a little more invisible. And part of that is like, unlike one of the clips we're going to see, are we doing the battle thing or just Nicole?
Nicole.
Okay, well, never mind. I thought,
we can go to the battle.
Whatever, but there, there is some of the stuff in Northman, and it's kind of maybe fine for what's happening in the story is a little more like showy, and a lot of the oneers in Nosferatu are chamber pieces, so it feels like more delicate. But I feel like with Jaren and I, that's an extension of something that we've been working on for a while, and we're just trying to like get better at it. Louise Ford has, gets the least amount of credit and has the toughest job. Her work is invisible, and it's and there's a misconception that because Jaren and I plan these shots so carefully and they're so long that she just needs to like slap it together and it's done. Not the case, because the worst thing is that we don't have any coverage to fall back on. So if there's a problem, it's some other to fix it. Because it's like. Because not only does she have to like unwind something that can't really be fixed, but she has to make it look pre-planned because each of the edits are designed in a certain way. So it can be very challenging. But I've grown up together with both of them, and Jaren and I moved to Prague early so that our kids could start school on time. Louise is like my sister. I've spent more time with her than anyone aside from my wife because we're like in a room together like day after day after day after day. And like siblings, we can fight like siblings, but that like hopefully comes out for the better on screen.
But you mentioned the big action scenes and the bigger canvas when you were briefly talking about the Northman. And I do want to ask you about that kind of what did the bigger canvas allow you to do? And what did you bring from the Northman into the large canvas of Nosferatu as well?
I mean, the Northman was the greatest opportunity I could ever have had, and I'm grateful for it like every day to be able to play on that canvas and also to learn from the experience. But, obviously it was very exciting to be able to try to do like a big medieval battle sequence and a volcano sword fight, and that's the stuff you dream about when you're a kid. And so it's very satisfying, but also just being in the midst of all this, this hugeness and all these people who've worked with Ridley Scott and on James Bond and Star Wars and Game of Thrones, there's all these people who know how to do it the right way. And a lot of times we were asking them to reinvent the wheel, but they were up for it and they were experienced enough to do it at that large scale. So, I think I after the Northman, I feel like I now could call myself a film director for real, and I felt like I actually knew how to direct a film, and that I wasn't just convincing people that I knew how to make a film and hoping for the best. So because there's just like when Ethan Hawke's riding in to perhaps see in the beginning of the movie, like we're shooting it and I'm like, where are all the guys that I cast to be his retinue? I cast all these incredible guys, like where are they? And they're like, oh, they're behind the horse riders carrying the flags. was like, yeah, but they should be on the horses. We're like, oh, but you didn't cast the faces of the horse riders. You cast the faces of the background guys who can't ride horses. You know, that seems like a little thing, but like there's a million things like that in the Northman that like then that's very specific, but you can imagine how you can apply that same logic to another situation.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was very valuable.
Did it, before I play a clip of the Northman, did it help you to, or to make those concessions or to change at all your approach to directing to that detail?
I mean, it was just figuring out how to apply my approach on a larger scale. Like, because we really haven't changed anything. By the way, we sorted it out and did some stuff. I think it looks good when they come in. But you know, but yeah. So I think including like fixing a beard with CG.
Can you tell me which beard though?
Sure, but not you know, but yeah, well, sometime. So yeah, I think it's mainly just like how do you be yourself in the context of this larger thing.
So let's play a clip from the Northman. No, it's not one of the battle scenes,
Yeah, cool.
which are amazing. It's a different kind of battle scene.
I mean, you know, they're so great, and I also something I really like is, you know, when Nicole first recognizes him, she's front lit, and she's like, sort of stark and vulnerable, and then as she steps forward, she becomes. I mean, it's partially just because there's a fire in the middle of the room and that's how it works. But as she steps forward, she becomes underlit, and she got like unflattering Boris Karloff lighting as she's like really digging into him. And as it progresses, which we didn't really see, then she becomes backlit, and it's like very flattering as she becomes seductive. And it's pretty cool how it. I mean, her performance is awesome, but it really like highlights that.
No, I really love that scene. I wish we could play the entire thing.
Sure.
And that moment in particular really highlighted also the murkiness of the characters in the Northman, despite being this big Viking epic and this huge action, all these huge action set pieces. But it being such a much larger film, did you feel pressure to make those characters more streamlined, more here's a hero, here's a villain, we're not going to murky those waters?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I wanted it to be like the Icelandic sagas, which are not cut and dry, and they're, you know, the greatest heroes of the sagas are anti-heroes who are oftentimes outlaws, which is like a really bad thing in Viking culture. You know, these female characters like Gudrun are super dynamic. You know, like Gudrun's been through this crazy past, and you know, she's a survivor, but she makes choices that seem like slightly abhorrent, but you know, but because she's trying to like save herself and her family and these and you know and survive in this like you know super patriarchal society. That's cool. But yeah, obviously like Gladiator is a lot more palatable to people because there's like a good guy and there's a bad guy, and we know where we stand, and we can root for the good guy and we can hate the bad guy, and that works better. So this was definitely like challenging, but I had the support of the studio to do this movie, and they wanted this movie. But yeah, it was definitely complicated. And so actually the uncle was even more sympathetic in earlier cuts of the movie, but like when we were doing test screenings for audiences, some people just like could not get behind the villainous uncle being like such a good father and like so sympathetic and like so, you know, it was so we had to like cut down some of his niceties.
Oh, some of them remained.
Yes.
And you know, you were talking about being interested in extreme faces, and when I think about your work, a lot of it is these very intense close-up shots of these amazing faces. Even here, you know, the way that they shift with the light. But the Northman in particular think a lot about these incredible scenes of bodies, you know, at war and in pain and being dragged around, and there's a lot of gore and violence in it. How did you approach filming those scenes? Kind of how did you shift your approach when you have to film something that is so heavily reliant on movement and bodies and choreography?
Yeah, I mean, instinctually. I don't know. I don't know. You kind of see it for what it is. Like, I mean, the volcano fight where you have these naked bodies, like we couldn't show. I don't know. It's weird. Like, we weren't allowed to show penises, so that it can play on airplanes, and and I don't. But it's like, I don't know. Would it have been distracting in a bad way? Would you have been focusing on that if they weren't like in shadow, or would it have added something that like more realism? Like, I don't know. But but interested. Like, this is so weird that I'm going off on this tangent. But like, like there is a way, even though it is like Viking, that it feels like classical pottery, even the color palette. And this is not something I was like thinking about at the time. Actually, Sean brought this up, but not this next part. But but in the style of that work, like the men's genitals are all like shrunken up, and but you're thinking like, yeah, because it's not about that, and also like it's about like the bodies in action, moving, and the story and the fight. Yeah, don't know how that answers your question, but something to think about while you're on your way home tonight.
Oh, I'm so glad this is being recorded. And with the Northman, especially with working with Sean and kind of taking so much from that mythos and that superstition, and having all of these beautiful Valhalla scenes as well, where it is very much part of that world. That is, you believe that. Did you feel more freed up than with previous films? Like, because I've read, in a lot of people, you've spoken a lot about how you like being constrained by research and the historical accuracy. Did operating in a folkloric sense free you up a bit more?
No, because I'm trying to do folklore accurately, whatever that means.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I brought Sean onto this because I felt I needed it. Like, obviously, no one's going to accuse me of like culturally appropriating a white culture, but I the Icelanders like know what saga characters they're related to, and I wanted someone who was like steeped in that. And Sean was anxious about it because, like me, he wasn't really into Vikings and the like right wing sort of obsession with Viking culture is something that made us both kind of allergic to it. But we felt, no, this would be cool. Like, let's go for it. And I think Sean, being an Icelander and someone who's like, and culturally those stories have evolved, and authors like ever since the Viking Age have been building upon these stories and doing their own versions of it. He felt freer to do things, and I would kind of be like, no, it has to be just like the sagas. It has to like make sense with the archaeological research, and he was cool to go along with that. But yeah, I think there's nothing better about historical accuracy. Like Poor Things is not historically accurate, in any way, shape, or form, but it's like an awesome world that you enjoy being in, and it's like perfect for that story and that style of filmmaking. But historical accuracy is something that like I love, and I enjoy the research aspect of it. But it also aligns all of my heads of department, so we all know exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for this unattainable idea called historical accuracy. Again, it's impossible because it's only going to be an interpretation, and we didn't live in the Viking Age. Maybe if a Viking saw that movie, they would say, "Why is everyone dressed like dead people?" Because obviously the examples of clothing we have are from burials, so we don't know. But it is a sort of driving force, and I also think that the more, I would do this regardless, but the more that the material world and the interior world of the period is articulated with as much detail as possible and as much like accuracy as possible, the more that I think I propose the more the audience can sort of get on board metaphysical things like vampires existing in the world.
Thank you for teeing me up to talk about Nosferatu. And we've got a little clip from the film, but I know that precious few people have seen it so far. So We're not going to do any spoilers. I'm going to steer clear away from those.
A familiar scene.
Yes. So you've spoken about your first impressions and your relationship with the Murnau film, but what did it feel like for you to be working on adapting, reimagining pre-existing material as opposed to having no boundaries?
You have to be respectful, and that is another thing that is like a little bit just down to instinct. But I wanted to kind of further understand what Murnau, Heinrich Galim, the screenwriter, and all of Murnau's collaborators, what were their intentions.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously Nosferatu is discussed as an expressionist film because it's part of the German expressionist movement, but I feel like these filmmakers were trying to embrace German romanticism from the middle of the 19th century, and they are literally referencing romantic painters and Biermeier painters in this work. And I think if you compare it to Caligari or Metropolis or or in some other Murnau films, it is less expressionist looking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of a big that was a guiding principle in the adaptation. And then so you kind of you have the fairy tale structure that is Nosferatu, and I wanted it to be Nosferatu and not Dracula and follow those movements. Mm-hmm. But then because it is an enigmatic fairy tale, there are a lot of question marks. It left a lot of room for me to embellish and amplify with the things that I became obsessed with in the research. So yeah.
Are you able to share some of those things that you became obsessed with?
I think so, because I've been talking about it in press. So I'll talk about it here too. But maybe having not seen the film, it will resonate less. But in Murnau's film, Ellen is a somnambulist and a sleepwalker in the 19th century, even medically, was considered someone who is more in tune with another realm, and perhaps an astral realm. They're often people who are somnambulists were often thought to be excellent spirit mediums. But that was really exciting to me, because then I knew that this could be a story about a woman who is an outsider, who is a victim to not just the vampire but 19th century society, and she has an understanding of the other side of the world that she cannot articulate. She doesn't have language for, and she doesn't have people who can relate to her on this level. Her husband loves her. She loves her husband, but he can't get this side of her. So she's being called mad and melancholic and hysteric because this stuff is repressed and bubbling up. Unfortunately, the one person who can understand this side of her is a demon, is a vampire, is Orlok. And so you have this kind of tragic demon lover story that is a love triangle about obsession and possession. And so, in the Murnau film, Ellen becomes the central protagonist by the end of the film. But in my story, she's there from the beginning, which I think is a much more interesting way into it, because finally in the Murnau film, the male characters don't have their shit together, and here they're still trying, but we're following her path anyway. And the other main thing that is particularly different is that Orlok is a vampire from a folk tradition. So he looks like a dead Transylvanian nobleman, which is the first time that's actually ever happened, where he's dressed accurately like a 16th century Transylvanian nobleman, and it's interesting. This is one of the reasons why it's fun to do this research. That coat with the arms down to his ankles, well, that's insane, but that's what they wore because it was cool to wear your coat over your shoulders in that region. And by the way, I have all the money in the world to have sleeves that reach the floor, because I'm rich. So, but this influences the way that he looks, the way that he talks, the way that he drinks blood, and many other things that are slightly different. I still wanted to acknowledge Max Schreck. There are things about his fingers and the shape of his skull, and other things that you'll see in the film that do acknowledge Schreck, but he is his own beast.
And there's been so many thousands of interpretations of the vampire and of the original source text as well as Nosferatu, the Murnau film, over the years. What did you want to add to the vampire in particular with your film?
It's less about adding and more about going back to the root, because I think when you go back to these early things, you find ideas that seem right, but they seem to be almost like you forgot them, but here they are, at least for me. But the reason why is because basically I wanted this to be a horror movie. Like, yes, it is a gothic romance, but also, Nosferatu in very many ways invented horror films. There's horror films earlier for sure, but like this is the one. And I think when Hutter throws the lid off the sarcophagus in the castle, that was a jump scare. When the first mate tears open the crate, the rats come out, and he sees the superimposition of Orlok, that was a jump scare. So I wanted this. The vampire needs to be scary. And of course, as we have Kinski's beautiful, tragic, introspective, sad vampire, evolving into Gary Oldman's tragic anti-hero vampire, and then finally, my friend Pattinson is a sparkling, non-scary, totally heroic vampire. So we have to take the time machine back to when vampires were really fucking scary and people actually believed in them so to make it scary again. No, I mean I try not to have regrets, even though it sounds like I do, like a ton. But again, like, you learn from that stuff, I think that what you're always managing, unless you're Ridley Scott, is you're almost always the least experienced person on set as the director. Because everyone is making a lot of movies all the time on your crew. Your DP makes however many movies a year, your editor slightly less but a lot, and then the dolly pusher is making however many movies there are a year. So basically, when do you listen to the people around you who literally know more about filmmaking than you do? Like, they do. And when do you have to say, this is my time to be me? There's no easy answer for that, but that, I think, is the thing that you're always kind of modulating. And it is much harder when you're doing your short films in your first feature, because no one knows who that you are and no one takes you seriously. So that becomes more challenging then. Yeah, it's very intimidating, and I'm definitely wrestling with hubris, but also, as you can see, I'm two-sided about about my confidence levels. But it's good. You have to have a reality check, and certainly because it fell apart many times. There was times I thought I clearly should not be making this movie. Murnau's ghost is reaching out and saying, "Dude, don't touch this shit. You don't deserve it." But I've worked so hard and did so much research and you just kind of have to respect the original and go for it. But certainly, you have those doubts. But by the time we were shooting, I needed to kind of let it go, for better or for worse, and just embrace it. But certainly myself, Bill Skarsgård, David White, who designed the makeup, and Robin Carroll, the composer, we were the ones who felt the most the burden of the fact that we're doing Nosferatu. So it certainly wasn't lost on me. I'll say that. It's hard, and I think that early on you are wearing your influences on your sleeve more, and then I think that's fine. I mean, look, when Picasso got out of doing sort of academic painting, he was painting like everybody else, like little cooler but the same style, and that's fine. But I think, but I think it's just about repetition and keep going. I mean, something that I did a lot. I adapted plays into films. Some that I thought I actually might make foolishly. Some that were just for exercises. But I think doing some exercises like that can be helpful. Steeping yourself in someone else's language and world to kind of can be a way of finding yourself. But I think that obviously just leaning into what turns you on. I mean, people say write what you know, and obviously I write a lot of what I don't know, but it still comes from a personal place. The Witch, in a weird way, is based on my family, and even though and my family is like, I can hear, even though it's in early modern English, I can hear our family's arguments like in the text. So it is always like about coming from a personal place. Even if you're like, I want to write like Quentin Tarantino, like do it as you somehow, and then as you evolve, you'll become more yourself, hopefully. These things, it always excites me when my fellow nerds feel that I got it right, and one of the greatest privileges that I have is working with experts in the field on these things. Like I got to work with folklore experts and like English 17th century farming experts on the Witch, and we had I was at a Q&A the other night, and there was like a Romanian audience member who was like rattling off all the Romanian things that I nailed in Nosferatu, and I was just like, yes, even though of course I was working with Florin Lazarescu, who should have definitely been making sure I got those things right in the first place, but it does feel good. And I would also say that like I wasn't without friends like by any means as a kid, like, and I was energized in a world of like theater kids and theater dorks and like people, and I had a band, and there, but this like hyper specific interests, it's cool to feel like not alone, and that there are other people out there, and there's these like super specific weird things. It's lovely. Yeah, I mean, some of the things I can't share, but certainly
But tease.
Yeah, but certainly there is one very prominent Vlad Tepes feature you will find on Orlok.
Okay.
And every other Transylvanian nobleman. I think. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, something that was interesting that Florin mentioned to me that was a little bit of like, fuck, is he was like, you have to remember that very often Strigoi are said to have red faces, and I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? And but David, because he is like a corpse, like he is more of a zombie visually than like Frank Langella. and and so we found a way to like have blood pooling after he feeds, in certain situations that would acknowledge even that little nugget of thing. So yeah, that's the best you're gonna get out of me right now.
So I gather there's no impaling and blood coming out of the back entrance.
No. Because I mean, he is not Vlad Tepes because he's also not Dracula. He is Orlok, and weirdly, Orlok, with some funny accents, is Hungarian for grinding. So, but I think in the piece of work that I gave Bill, like, he had a Romanian name too that is, lost to time. Okay. No. I think I imagine Herzog would hate my movie, and it would be against his brand to like it. I think, which and I hope he detests it. I'm a massive Herzog fan, and I'm really in love with his works. But I think Heart of Glass and Caspar Hauser were perhaps more influential on what I was doing to a degree. So I watched, like those films I watched in the 10 years of trying to make Nosferatu. The Herzog movie, I did not watch like the Herzog movie or the Coppola movie in the 10 years of trying to make Nosferatu. That said, I watched them 40 billion times like growing up. So their impact is undeniable on the film, and I know there's choices that I made that I would not have made had I not seen the Herzog movie so many times. But I definitely think, minus like a couple sort of things that don't really matter, we were after a different beast to some degree. To maybe to a large degree, but you'll tell me what you think. I think whatever, like anything's valid, and I think like I've read a lot of Freud. My wife's a psychologist. There was a point in which we've been together for a very, very long time. We grew up together, in fact. And there was a point at which when she was in grad school when she was like winning every single argument. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, read more Freud. But I also I tend to look at things maybe more than I would like to, just because I would wish to be more multifaceted. But I tend to look at things primarily through a Jungian lens, and so that tends to come out like in what I'm doing. But yeah, I definitely like read other philosophies, and sometimes when I'm writing something, try to like approach it from this or that. But I think if it becomes too cerebral in that way, it can sometimes like get trapped for me. It's weird because I'm talking about all these other constraints that I really like, and for some reason, like that random thing is I'm saying like is constrictive. But so I would say like if that's something that interests you, go to town. Please, I want to see it. There's a nostalgia for it, and there is a feeling. Obviously, there's a zillion good-looking movies on that have been shot, digitally, but I just it's something that I can't quite explain. I'm sure if my DP was here, he could explain it. But but the other thing, there is a discipline about it on set that is also very nice, because everyone knows that it matters a little more, and you aren't just like rolling all the time. I believe I'm right in saying that, like when Kurosawa shot Ran, that they rehearsed, and then they would do one take. So unless there was a camera jam, one take. And there is like I don't have the guts to do that, but I'm not Kurosawa. And but I think that there is a beauty in that, and it sort of makes the act of making the film sacred, And I wouldn't go that far with just shooting on film, but there's a piece of it that feels like more magical, if I can be so fussy.
I think ending on a fussy note is perfect. Thank you so much for being here, for being an incredible audience. Thank you so much to you, Robert.